Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So it's time to make another rogue video, this time for module 24. I'm barely using any of the new stuff, so you'll be able to use this build pretty much right away, especially since the Band of Air got nerfed, a few things have changed. You can see my stats standing still, and while in combat we can see we get those juicy 90s. So in this video I shall go over every single section of my build in as much detail as I think is necessary. Any further questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and you can skip to any section you're most interested in with the timestamps on the play bar. Now this build should suit you just fine in both AoE content and single target content with very few modifications, simply switching 1 feat and 2 companions. And so this build will suit you for any single random queue, any solo content between adventures, campaigns, and even going so far as getting into Temple of the Spider, Master, and fulfilling your role to your maximum potential. So the first thing we'll start with, and which I deem the most important, is your powers. For single target, it's like this. For AoE, it's like this. Now let's go over a little bit more why so. Your at-wills, Duelist Flurry is your primary at-will. You're just trying to always have time on target, especially in a boss fight with Duelist Flurry. Your secondary is Gloaming Cut, and you only use it for your stealth regeneration buff, and later on in the fight, when its damage becomes much bigger. You can get up to double damage from this per hit. Now the most important thing to note is Duelist Flurry will cause your target to bleed. You will see this little green icon next to the buff bar of the enemy, and you can see sometimes, depending on the quality, the amount of stacks that you have of bleed, and you want to have 10 stacks all the time. So if you don't have 10 stacks of bleed on your target, make sure you're using Duelist Flurry. If you do have 10 stacks, you can switch to Gloaming Cut for the added damage. The damage difference between the two is very minimal when your target is full HP, but again, as your target loses HP, Gloaming Cut will get better and better. When you're in an AoE fight, you want to be using Gloaming Cut to finish off an enemy. And the reason is because it has the added effect to immediately give you 20% of your stealth bar back when you kill them. So it's something you use in between. I generally like to use Duelist Flurry on any enemy who still has significant HP, and once they get low, you're using Gloaming Cut. Now, of course, at-wills in AoE is like the last thing you do once all your encounters are on cooldown. So let's move to your encounters. And again, for single target, the most important one for me is Wicked Reminder. Try and make sure you have this on your target at all times. You're basically casting it when it's off cooldown, and it then orientates when you want to use Assassinate. Assassinate is slightly lower cooldown, however you do not want to cast Assassinate before your Wicked Reminder. It's always Wicked Reminder and then Assassinate. Now, for me, I like to use Path of Blades just all the time for both AoE and single target, as it's really good utility, and some boss fights have ads and it will help kill the ads. However, if you really want to maximize your burst damage, switch to Lashing Blade. Forget about the stealth thing. Our stats are going to be capped at 90% crit severity, so unfortunately you gain no extra benefit by using it from stealth. Again, I'll go over my rotation in the time-stamped section below. So as for AoE, you're of course using your Path of Blades, Blade Flurry, and your Smoke Bomb. Most importantly, Blade Flurry used from stealth. As for daily powers, well, they don't really change. You can see again using Whirlwind of Blades for AoE and Shocking Execution for single target. Our class features, Skillful Infiltrator and Oppressive Darkness, again both AoE and single target. The feats look like such, and the only thing we change between AoE and single target is Skullcracker. Skullcracker for single target and Duelist Expertise for AoE. That's about it. If you really can't be bothered having a second loadout, there's no trouble with that. Just have Skullcracker all the time. It's more important to have that single target damage than it is AoE. And just keep in mind you're a rogue, so you can go invisible with your tab mechanic, and this means you will have combat advantage against any enemy, no matter positioning, but it drains over time, and as soon as you attack with, let's say, an encounter, it's gone. The most important effect though is when you leave stealth, you will gain a 10% additional damage boost for 5 seconds. So what you want to do is enter stealth, do a flurry of duelist flurry, and then it's gone, and then use your encounters, Wicked and Assassinate. Again, just always using Path of Blades when it's off cooldown. That's how I do it. The reason is because the added effect of Wicked Reminder, using it within stealth, is broken and doesn't work. So there's no point. You're better off giving Wicked Reminder as well the extra benefit of having the 10% damage from leaving stealth. So you'll again go into stealth, use a duelist flurry, stealth is gone, use Wicked and Assassinate. Of course, make sure you have combat advantage against your target by orientating yourself so that you have this purple arc or blue arc. That's about it for both AoE and single target for your power setup, with a bit more explanations thrown in. But now we'll go over the dedicated rotation section, what you want to be doing in single target first. Now, if you're in top tier endgame content, you will be running a debuff artifact and you'll have artifact calls. The way you want to start a boss fight is usually using your artifact, your Path of Blades, use Duelist Flurry 2 times with stealth on the second one, and then Wicked Reminder with then your daily power, Assassinate, and your mount power. And then you can throw in the Hawk at the end if you manage to get the cast time done. Now you want to do all of that within the 10-second window of the artifact call. Once the artifact is cast, there's 10 seconds before they pretty much all expire. Now, most importantly, you're using Shocking Execution before you use Assassinate and before you use your mount power because of the feat, your back alley tactics, so that they gain a 10% damage buff from that feat again. Additionally, try and make sure that you're leaving stealth. You're draining all your stealth just before you're using Wicked, and then your daily, and then Assassinate, and then your mount power. And that way, they also gain the 10% damage buff. Alternatively, if you don't want to worry about the timing, you can use Wicked Reminder from stealth. Again, the added effect doesn't work, but at some point it will, and thus using it from stealth will be valuable. And it'll also make it so that you make sure to have that extra 10% buff for your mount power, which you're using pretty much last, but you could use your mount power just before Assassinate as well. The order doesn't matter too much. As for AoE, again, it's just spam down your encounters. Use your smoke bomb once you're amongst the enemies. Go into stealth, use your blade flurry, and then you can use your blade flurry again. However, sometimes you don't want to use your blade flurry again, so it goes on cooldown. You might want to wait because your stealth regen is 6 seconds, which means you could regenerate your stealth quicker than blade flurry will be going off cooldown, and so you could use it again. So you might want to wait. Make sure you use a gloaming cut, and if you get a good hit and kill somebody with it, you gain the extra stealth and you can use blade flurry from stealth again. Just keep in mind when you take damage, your stealth regen will be significantly lowered. So sometimes in content where damage is unavoidable, can be just best using flurry twice, along with if they just die in 2 hits. That's the most important part. Blade flurry from stealth, and otherwise gloaming cut to kill enemies. You can use duelist flurry on some big tanky enemies where the bleed might do some damage before they're dead. As for your artifact, daily, and mount power in AoE, well, what you want to be doing is entering stealth, artifact, daily power, mount power, blade flurry from stealth to exit, and that's about it. Get it all timed right and you'll deal massive damage, because when you cast your daily power from stealth, you'll have combat advantage damage against everything along with your mount power, and that mount power will then buff up your blade flurry that you're using at the end, which you can use then twice, once from leaving stealth and once again after. So that's our rotation. We finally move to our stats and what they're looking like. So again, in our AoE build, when we just go to these dummies, you can see straight away all lovely 90s. It's a little bit less spectacular in single target, as we'll miss slightly a bit of combat advantage. You'll see that here going in combat, Again, everything procs off very nicely. With tiny bit of combat low, a tiny bit of crit chance low. Crit chance will go up by 2% if you're running with a paladin. Otherwise, it's okay as it is. You're just getting your crit strike buffed up with your companion enhancement, and then you're getting your combat advantage buffed up with your Wild Hunt Rider with the Path of Blades. And that's another big reason I use Path of Blades in single target, because of the Wild Hunt Rider. And then you're very easily obtaining the 15% crit severity from this armor piece, as it procs so quickly. Now, if you're trying to make your own build, make sure to prioritize initially power, then combat advantage, and then crit severity, and then crit strike with accuracy last. Focus on these main statistics before item level. Item level will just happen. You'll obtain it by getting this good gear. And that gives us these stats. Now, we miss a teeny bit of combat advantage, but I'm not too worried about that because I intend to change my boots, and then I'll change my shirt, change the shirt over to this corroded one, and then the boots will be changed over to the Seals boots, which will give me my extra combat advantage I need to cap my combat advantage stat. So overall, our stats are looking pretty good, and they're very easy to maintain because we're not using any gear that requires us to deal more than 10% of our maximum HP in a damaging hit, as you will see with other gear pieces that you might have for your head or you might have for your chest, like the tactful leathers or your Serene hood. So now let's move on to particularly the gear we are using. And again, it's the same for single target and AoE. The headpiece is this one from Mastercrafting. Now, many people will struggle to obtain this as it's very expensive. So I would recommend just going to the Serene hood. Otherwise, you could have an augment companion instead to give you the crit strike rating or some other ratings, and then rejig your stats to gain that rating. Then for our armor, it's the sharp jacket. And this is very beneficial because instead of, let's say, the tactful leathers, you gain the stacks, the extra crit severity whenever you hit your target. It doesn't matter what with. Using just our Path of Blades here in combat, you can see we gain these stacks within a split second. And we can maintain the stacks, continually refreshing them pretty much every second because we're hitting. We have our Poison Thorn up, we have our Bleeds up, and every single hit triggers your Reckless Rage. So very easy to maintain. That's why I'm using it instead of the tactful leathers or the other one that requires you to deal a maximum hit of 10% of your max HP, which you can only generally get with either a hard hitting gloaming cut or your encounters. But because you're using duelist a lot to proc bleeds can proc the gear, but it's just not reliable. Then the arms, again, are the petrified wristlets. Again, these can be pretty expensive to obtain. Alternatively, again, I would recommend just having an augment companion and they'll give you the stats. And then you can run with different arms that would give you, let's say, power or damage, etc. As for the weapons, we are of course just going with the masterwork ones. They work great. The new upcoming weapons will be pretty good when you get them upgraded to legendary, especially in scaled content, but I'm still working on figuring out how to upgrade them to legendary. I'll make a video once I do. I'll test them and make an update video on whether you should use them or not. But for now, it's the masterwork weapons. Then we're using the Wasteland Wanderers. Again, as soon as I can get my hands on the new Seals gear, I will be switching to these Dragon Hide Pikes for the 10,000 accuracy when in a party. Just keep in mind they'll only give defense when not in a party, so in solo content you might want to just stick with this setup. And when we do switch out these boots for the accuracy, we will switch our shirt over to the corroded one for the extra combat advantage. And just make sure you can adjust your stats correctly. We are using the shirt that gives us accuracy, so we have no dependency there on other stats to get our things capped. Neck and waist, we are using the Demogorgon set. Now, you do not have to use the Demogorgon set. It is good. It is good for burst damage, and the main reason is because the strength it gives you. Alternatively, you can use the Mythalar set, which is very good for DPS, for damage per second. Not as good for burst, since it's damage that adds up over time as you attack, and then you would use the Mythical artifact with that. Right now the Demogorgon set's unobtainable, and I would not recommend buying it at such an expensive price from the auction house. And the Mythical set comes very cheaply, for free pretty much, from Dragonbone Vale campaign after 3 weeks, just over 3 weeks of farming. So make sure you get Mythilar, not the Demogorgon set, if you're on a budget. Otherwise, we're using the Red Eyes Glare. That comes from the Vault of Stars dungeon in your end chest, should be much easier to get nowadays. And the Soothsayer's Ring, which just comes from Dragon Hunts again, very easy to get. Now, I will just update you on that. The Wasteland Wanderers comes from also Vault of Stars, but the hardcore version where you fight the mini bosses. And again, this arms and this head are from Master Crafting. You'll need a Master Crafter to make them for you. And the shirt comes from Dragon Hunts, or the armor. Weapons you can get from the auction house or from some crafter. Just make sure they have the Stronghold bonus as their set. As for our shirt and pants, again, you can see we have this Mighty Dwarven body pattern. Again, we'll be switching over to the Corroded shirt. Again, you can get it on the auction house, or you can get it from the mini bosses within the zone, Dragonbone Vale. Just check videos on that. And the pants, we're using the ones with 2400 critical strike. That's the important part. And that's about it. High item level, both come from Dragon Hunts. As for the modifications on the gear, you can see the headpiece has got crit severity, armor has got power, arms have got power, and boots have got crit severity. As for the weapons here, you can see the main hand has got Duelist Flurry, and then the offhand has got recharge speed and critical strike. As for our neck, rings, and waist, they all got combat advantage jewels in there. So now we move to our enchantments, and you can see the exact setup, and not much has changed at all. I'm not intending to upgrade any new enchantments, so my builds are around the ones I've made originally. That's 2 jades, 2 garnets for our offense, and then defense, it's whatever's left. Very important part is that we have a citrine which we can swap out for a garnet. Let's say we have a party with the healer running Runic Aura, then the Runic Aura will give us that 2500 extra power, and we can make use of that just by switching the enchantment. Very nice. Again, defense enchantments don't really matter. You ideally want the garnets for the extra defensive rating. As for your utility, again, a garnet for the forte is about the best you're getting. Overloads, a Rage of Flames, and Devil's Precision, they come from the new lockboxes, along with, let's say, Hell Pit right now with the challenge tokens. And then we have a Poison Thorn, which right now is the best for a rogue because we're nice and fast hitting. However, in AoE, you might want a Cursed Burn, but overall, they deal very minuscule damage that I wouldn't worry about it, and just get a Poison Thorn and use that all the time. Bonus one, we get recharge speed. As for our artifacts, we just have these 4. We have the 3 storybooks, and the reason is because why not? I have them, I may as well use them. But the difference between just having 1200 item level artifacts, you can check the collections here. There are many artifacts these days with 1200 item level. Just have a look through the ones, check their prices, and see basically which ones you should be using. The ones not in the collections are the ones you can get again from Dragon Hunts. There are 5 of them down the bottom here that you can get an upgrade with a maximum of 1200 item level. So just go with those maximum item level artifacts instead of the journals if those are out of your budget. The benefit is like next to no difference unless you're in scaled content. And of course, we're running with the Demogorgon's Reach for the debuff artifact. It's pretty decent. So now we move to our race and ability scores. And you can see I'm a Wood Elf. And the reason being is because the bonus critical strike that it gives you. And I need that for my build. There are many alternative races. Just make sure they give you the 5 offensive stats here. But you will have to then adjust things that you're using to make the most of your statistics, and the Wood Elf just makes it fit the best right now because we suffer at trying to get crit capped. Our ability scores, you can see it's all strength and charisma. You can switch charisma to dexterity. You'll see very little difference if you're low on that crit severity. Just be aware of that. Right now we're a bit overcapped in crit severity because our Forger's box gave us that 2%. And that is because our chess piece gives us a maximum of 15%. So that would be 75% at the optimal rate. And so we move to our companions. Now, first we'll talk about summoned companion, and that's a little complicated. I tend to use an active striker companion which deals damage, but that is on the expensive side. On the live server, I switch between using the succubus mainly for AoE and also a lot of single target fights. So it's a companion you can use everywhere. It's got very good vulnerability debuff, and it's also got a reduction to the enemy's outgoing damage with Deadly Kiss. So all around it's a good debuff companion, and it also does very good damage, especially in AoE. Alternatives are the Pseudo Dragon for high single target damage, along with the Honey Badger for high single target burst damage, the Githyanki for good AoE and also burst damage, the Black Death Scorpion for the extra combat advantage effect, so you can basically ignore positioning of the boss. Some bosses, I believe it's bugged and doesn't work. And then there's the Paranoid Delusion for high single target damage. But keep in mind, it's sustained damage, DPS, it's not burst damage. So some fights are much better off to have burst damage instead. So personally, I run with Succubus nearly all the time. Now the budget option is an augment companion, the Owlbear Cob. And if you're around for the Battle Pass Draconic Rage, you could have got your hands on the Icosahedron Ion Stone. They are both really good budget options for augment companions, allowing you essentially to use different gear than I have these masterwork stuff. The augment companion will give those ratings instead of this stuff. Now, along with intending to change our boots over to the accuracy boots from the North Dark Reaches, these ones we have obtained the new companion gear from there. Again, that is very simply from the campaign. All you have to do is grind a bit of the currency of the campaign and you can get the gear. And we're getting these ideal chain sword knots of the companion, and they give accuracy and combat advantage. Now, you might be better off, instead of having the accuracy, to have, let's say, a single stat one, but they're so much more expensive and much harder to obtain, as you have to complete Master Temple of the Spider to obtain the reagents. So just get the double stats one and go with these ones. Accuracy and combat advantage, they fit best with my build right now. We got 3 of those and they have very high item level. Of course, you want a mythic companion enchantment, and if you're upgrading your character from the beginning, this is like the first enchantment you want to upgrade for your companion's damage, along with if you run an augment instead. As for our bonuses here, again, precision gives us the crit strike. We have bigger they are from Minsk for the extra damage. This is single target, keep in mind. And then the Wild Hunt Rider, combat advantage. The Knight, extra damage. Batiri against bosses, the single target again. And then the Alchemist for the stats. For AoE, when we are against multiple enemies and none of them are bosses, we switch Minsk over to the Phase Spider for the extra stats. We switch over to Makeus's Observations for the accuracy instead of the Batiri. And you could switch the Wild Hunt Rider over to like Staldorf or the Golden Cat, just for the more reliable combat advantage boost, rather than having to wait for Path of Blades to proc it. And that's probably totally what I should do. So I will. There you go. And so now we move to our mounts. Now, on this setup in AoE, again, we mainly just use the Pegasus here. There are lots of alternatives, and we're using Opportunistic. For single target, again, we're just using Bigby's Hand for that massive single target damage. It's really good because it deals physical damage, which means we gain the big benefit from having that physical damage boost from strength. It's like 3% versus 7.3%. That's pretty significant. All the other single target powers like Tunnel Vision, the Giant Toad Tongue Lash, all have magical damage along with the Golden Warhorse. So they will only benefit from your magical damage boost, which again is 3% versus a full 7%. Still running with opportunistic. Now in my stable, if you did copy my previous build, not a lot has changed, so you shouldn't need any more mythic insignias, except maybe 1 or 2, like an additional barbed one. And we still have 3 of those skill insignias, we have 3 of those brutality insignias, and the rest are all dominance there, as you can see. As for the bonuses themselves, 2 warlord inspirations for our companions damage, an artificer's persuasion for the extra cooldown when we use an artifact, and then assassin's covenant for the extra offensive stats. The only 2 colors that are worth investing in is the encounter power damage one, and then also the crit severity one. That's about it. You can forget about the other colors, leave them on purple. And so we move on to our boons. Here, we're just going to be completing campaigns to get all these points to slot in. Of course, you just want to get all the offensive ones here on the left. You want to pick up the movement speed, and then you want to pick up these damage and damage resistance against certain enemy types that will help when you do random queues and get certain content. Tier 5, you want Forte, and you want recharge speed. Master boon, you of course just want Bloodlust. The rest all suck. Guild boons, we're running with power, and we're running with doesn't matter in defense, but ideally like defense. And then utility, you want like revive sickness, so that when you die and get a skull, the effect is lessened. Finally, we move to consumables, and here we simply just use 3 consumables. We are not doing anything fancy or expensive. So we've got the potency, we've got the squash soup, which is the normal squash soup. There are alternative legacy foods, but they're all expensive and no longer obtainable. And then we have the Sun Lord's Gift Elixir. Potency, just buy it on the auction house or watch my video on how to craft it yourself. Squash soup comes from events, so if you don't have it stacked up from Summer Festival, you might want to go and buy it. And then the elixirs just come from invoking in the store here. You can see you can just buy the Sun Lord's Gift Elixir. Course on the auction house as well. You could use invocation blessings, but once you die they expire and it's whatever. So I generally don't rely on it, but to fit in this build you can keep spamming them until you get the accuracy buff, which is going to be like the book, as you'll see in the top left there. We've got to use a bunch of them, and there you go. 1000 accuracy is what they will give you. And then you could use the Diamond's Blessing. Now, that again will expire once you die, and I don't really use it. It's a try-hard thing. But they've made it a lot easier to get Shattered Diamonds, so there's an option to grind those and use those if you really want to sweat on other people. Now, if you do die in combat, your potions, your buffs are gone. For example, you look here in your buff bar and you can see they've already expired, so we'll go and use them. There we go, a Flask of Potency and a Squash Soup, and now we have them active along with our Monitor's Light. Again, I'm clicking this icon up here, which scroll down, you see your buffs. You can also see the Fortress box here. So if we do go and die, you can see that the buffs will all expire once we revive, whether that's through a scroll or just resetting. You can see our Squash Soup and our Potency are gone, which means it's very important once you die, even while you're in the thick of combat, to get these buffs active again. Double click on them and you can check your buff bar again and they will be active. Just keep in mind that using a Flask of Potency will put your Stone of Health on cooldown, so there might be some situations you don't want that. And if you do die and you're doing some challenging content like Master Temple of the Spider, you might need some more survivability, since each Revive Sickness that will reduce, when you have the Revive Sickness boon, your hit points by 5% along with your damage. So you might die to the next mechanic if your hit points are a bit lower. So you want to have like Caprice as a backup. So once you die, I would switch to Caprice instead of Squash Soup if that fight is particularly hard. And that's about it. That's all I use. There are so many other fancy buffs. Also, again, yeah, belt item, Stone of Health, the Hawk for single target, the Doohickey for AoE. Alternatively, you can use the Dragonfire belt item from the Battle Pass. I have not obtained it or tested it yet. I do intend to though. And of course, we're using the Forger's Box. There is going to be a new like Forger's Box with the next module, but I haven't obtained it and I don't know how yet, and it might take us quite a while. well, so I'm not going to depend on that just yet. It is good, but I only really see it good within the new dungeon. That's about it. Otherwise, it is a little bit more reliable on gaining the crit chance, accuracy and power, but I would like to have those capped rather than relying on this thing. And yes, you mainly use the Fortress box for the 3% power. Doesn't really matter what you receive with the following effects. They are all random what you get. So hopefully this build is somewhat insightful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you in due course, or just ask me on Discord. So again, I'd like to give a massive thank you to all of these channel members for their continued support. Oh, and yeah, if you want to know my appearance, that's it all just there. So if I presented this well, consider leaving the video a like, and if you're new around here, consider subscribing. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.